Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable with lies they eat like comfort food? To disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims. Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace, but ilkas and plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible, holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was normal to have to prove a claim you make. And folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes. It's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
Remain skeptical while you travel the road. The reason stay strapped with logic and facts. That's what it is, yo. Keep reality intact to help the truth grow. Question every claim, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road. The reason.
Welcome to the award-winning show, Road to Reason, a Skeptic's Guide to the 21st Century. My name is David Tamayo, and I am president and founder of Hispanic American Free Thinkers. And with me today, I have the pleasure of having a co-host that I hope we'll see a lot more in the future over here. His name is Dr. Nick Harding. Thank you, Nick, for being in the show today.
Thanks for having me, David.
Nick is a teacher, an educator, and ever since I've known him, he seems to care a lot about the truth. So I think he'd be perfect for this show. Now today we're also going to have a great interview, a great person, someone that I admire a lot in his style of writing. He's an author, is John Loftus. He is the author of the book Unapologetic, Why Philosophy of Religion Must End. And so I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation today.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
And so, you know, that's the idea. Now, Nick, before we go forward, tell us a little bit about yourself, something we don't know about you.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm a teacher here in Northern Virginia and love history. In fact, my particular interest is reading about the history of atheism. So there was a lot of interesting stuff for me in this book that we read today.
Where did you get your education from?
I got a PhD from Columbia up in New York.
Yeah. Up in New York? Yeah, I've heard
so
of it.
yeah, I wrote my dissertation, published it, but it's not about atheism. So.
Okay, and so it seems to me that to do a PhD, you have to have a passion for history and trying to know what happened exactly.
Oh yeah, just trying to reconstruct exactly what happened, and that is to a certain extent what we try to do in our movement.
Excellent. All right, Nick, why don't you start us with some announcements?
Yeah. Okay. So the 16th annual Free Thought Festival is going to take place in Sacramento, California, on October 15th. Speakers include Dr. Sikivu Hutchinson, Larry Decker, David Smalley, and others. The day before, on October 14th, they'll have the Secular Leadership Day conference for those interested in learning from many successful leaders.
Now, do you know any of those folks that are going to be there?
I have seen both Sikivu Hutchinson and David Smalley at various conferences when they've passed through Washington, yeah. I saw David Smalley a couple years ago at a Secular Coalition for America Lobby Day, and I also saw her at Sikivu Hutchinson at Women in Secularism 1. Excellent.
And you have been an activist in itself or not?
Off and on, yeah. Whatever moves me. I've been to both Reason rallies. Second one, thanks to you. And yeah, so one thing that I do is I do co-moderate Cafe Inquiry for the Center for Inquiry DC. It's the fourth Tuesday of every month at the Hill Center on Capitol Hill from 7 to 9.
Excellent. That's it's a great conversation that goes on over there.
This is a lot like what we'll be doing here.
Exactly. Only with alcohol, right?
And minus the camera, yeah.
All right. Well, the second announcement that we have is on from September 15th to October 15th is what is called the National Hispanic Heritage Day. Month, I mean. And what we're doing is celebrating the 56 million Americans that are Hispanic that live in the United States. It is a way to, we're part of the fabric of this nation. In fact, you being a history person, I thought I'd bring some factoids that might be enjoyed. And that is, so let me start with the first one. Latino and Hispanics is not a race. It is an it's an ethnicity. It's a cultural ethnicity in general, and they're people that are white, black, Asian, and every race we can think of, mostly just human race, right? Notice I said mostly. Like so 16.5% of the U.S. population is Hispanic, and so they bring in a lot of cultures and so on. Like a lot of other people have brought into the country. It's what makes America great. And Latinos have lived. A lot of people feel that Latinos have lived in the U.S. only since recently, because we hear a lot about immigration and things like that. But no, Hispanics have been in the U.S. since the 1500s. So, by 1775, you had a Spanish ship in Alaska. In 1783, Spain and Mexico held basically half of the continental United States in territory. That's a lot of land. And, just 3 out of the 4 most populous states in the United States came from Mexico or Spain. And the last factoid, more people speak Spanish in the United States than any other country in the world except for Mexico. That's a lot of Spanish speakers. And so it's part of who we are here as a people. And I think it's always good to remind ourselves that this country is made up of a whole variety of people.
I wonder if you could also do the contributions to atheism, right? The ideas for evolution came from, in Darwin's case, the Galapagos, and Wallace's case, the Amazon River. And he noticed that species on different sides of the river were different, and the river was splitting them.
And they've done the same. Yeah. So the idea here is that, in celebration this month, it's just one reminder that we as a country are better off as a country by being a multitude of peoples from all over the world. And that Hispanics just happens to be one of this group. Now, we're running out of time, so why don't we go and look at news?
Sure. Well, unfortunately, we're starting with a sad story from Lahore, Pakistan. Nadeem James, a 35-year-old Christian, was arrested last year after he sent a poem to a Muslim friend on WhatsApp. Yesterday, in eastern Punjab province, a Pakistani judge sentenced him to death after finding him guilty of insulting Islam's Prophet Muhammad. So I just think it's sad that in this day and age we're still punishing blasphemy with capital punishment, let alone any other punishment.
I would argue, one of the arguments that I don't think it'll fly because they're going to kill you no matter what, right? But one of the arguments that you could make is, well, if I offended Muhammad, why don't we just let Muhammad come and take care of me? Let him come and kill me or do whatever instead of having, these people come and doing the stuff. So really what we're talking about here is blasphemy laws. And believe it or not, there are some blasphemy laws still in the books in the United States, but because we have this little document called the U.S. Constitution, then they're typically meaningless. What do you think about blasphemy laws?
Well, I'm just glad that they won't be tuning into this show, hopefully, because we've got some blasphemy coming your way.
Oh, I think in a way, I hope they do tune in because I think it can enlighten them a little bit.
David, this is God.
There you go. I told you.
Those blasphemy laws are very, very important. I cannot be bothered with striking people down. I'm too busy flooding Texas and Florida right now. So I do need people to stone each other when they take my name in vain.
Certainly. I think let's define blasphemy. I've heard a couple of definitions. One is a speech that it has to be outlawed to prevent religion from losing arguments.
Or how about law to protect an all-powerful supernatural being from getting his feelings hurt?
Exactly, because he can create the universe, but don't say anything negative about him or her. It's always a macho-oriented kind of thing. All right, well, we have another piece of news that is kind of, when you say news, it's like never good. It's never like, this new discovery. It's typically the bad things that make the news. And so last week, the Vatican recalled an unnamed high-ranking official. Now, the Vatican is the seat of the Catholic religion, but it's also a government. So they have a theocracy in Europe, and they have representation here in here. And so there was this priest that was caught in an investigation that the FBI was carrying out on child pornography. And so they went to the Vatican and asked the Vatican to go ahead and remove the diplomacy so they can arrest them for it. And guess what the Vatican did?
They didn't remove the diplomacy.
I thought you were going to say, yes, they removed it and they allowed justice to take place. Absolutely not. They said, you know, we'll take care of this issue. We're going to immediately move them to the Vatican outside the United States and said, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. We'll make justice and we'll investigate. I'm willing to bet you $1 that that's the last we'll ever hear about this case. So it's the Catholic Church, and a lot of people that are, a lot of my family and friends that are Catholic will say, oh, but look, this new Pope, he's so progressive, he's the, man of the people, he's making so many changes. When you actually go and look to see what this Pope has actually done, is nothing. He's really good at selling ideas and things like that. But when it comes to effective changes to the church, not much has happened.
Well, I think there's this Australian cardinal that's in trouble back in Australia who has been his major appointee to high office. So
so it keeps happening, and this is what we know today, and this is with the visibility that we have today. Now imagine what was 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, the abuses that were there.
Yeah. If you read Rousseau's Confessions, some priest tried to get with him during his short career as a Catholic. So it's the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, it's really sad. So I'm not really sure what how we're going to be able to continue doing. There shouldn't be any privilege for religion when it comes to that kind of stuff. Well, I guess they were not going it on the religion part. They were doing it on the Vatican as a country and therefore a diplomatic community. But you have to admit that the Catholic Church historically has gone away with a lot because there seems to be a different standard for them as a church than it's been for everyone else. Now, Person of the Week.
Person of the Week.
Why don't you read a little bit about it,
David?
I'll jump in.
Our Person of the Week is a young Hispanic college graduate who's fast becoming a prominent figure in our movement. He's a member of the board of directors at HAFRI. He's been a contributor to the Secular Latino Alliance, and he's the founder of the Hispanic Atheist, also a writer for Free Thought Blogs and Patheos. He's a podcaster in NBC. He's also a co-host of the show. Born in Puerto Rico, his parents were in the military, and he grew up all over Latin America. For the hope that this young man represents and for all of the things he already does, we named Luciano Joshua Gonzalez as the Person of the Week.
And he is someone that I know personally, and I sincerely hope we had 1,000 more like him. He's at a very young age, very active. He started while he was in school, and a lot of times kids are active in school and they come out and they're ready to they stop their activism. So anyway, why don't we go to the joke and we go on a break.
Yeah. David, how do they know Jesus Christ was not born in West Virginia?
How?
You ever seen a wise man or a virgin in West Virginia?
Oh, please. West Virginia people, please forgive him. We'll go to a break.
When I was younger, I didn't want to admit I had a serious disease. Because of my diabetes, I lost the sight in my left eye. Misconceptions continue to surround this monster public health issue. But the simple truth is, diabetes can often be prevented and complications avoided. You're not alone. Understand the realities of diabetes and know that you can manage it and lead a full, active life.
There's an alarming trend in the world today. Everywhere you go, people are saying that cinema is dead. But cinema is not dead. My name is Count Simon Gauntley, and on my television program, Count Gauntley's Horrors from the Public Domain, I make it my mission to resurrect forgotten film classics. I promise to dredge the sewers and ford the stagnant streams of film history to ensure that no film is truly lost to the ages. Count Gauntley and FPA, keeping cinema alive! Alive! Alive!
Well, even though Joseph's been gone 18 months, we've made the decision to keep all his things as they were when he was here last. I finally just packed his toothbrush away like 6 months ago. It had been sitting on the counter in the bathroom. And I was cleaning the bathroom one day and I just thought, okay, it's time to put the toothbrush in the medicine cabinet.
So I just moved in with his family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that. That's disgusting. Oh, poop already. You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week, the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait. Look at them now on Facebook and YouTube. And remember to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, or there'll be hell to pay.
Welcome back to Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. So as promised, today we have a great speaker, and today we're going to have the pleasure of speaking via Skype with John W. Loftus. He's an influential atheist writer. He's a former Christian minister for many years, so he was preaching the good word, and he's also been an apologist. And so a lot of Christians don't like him because he knows that, apostasy, one of the reasons apostasy is such a bad thing is because now he knows the inside. He's been inside there for a long time. You can't BS him. You can't say you're not a true Christian, you were not this or anything. He was there for the longest time. And so he has more authority than a lot of people that were never Christian, for instance, to criticize. Yeah. So today we have him. He's written a great book called An Apologetic, Why Philosophy of Religion Must End. And so I think we're going to have a fantastic interview with him. So welcome to the show, Mr. John W. Loftus.
Thanks for having me. I feel honored.
Well, so where to start? Let's start. Why don't we start with him?
Yeah, let's go back to what David was saying about your previous career as a minister and what moved you to become an atheist and leave the profession.
Well, I wrote an encyclopedic-sized book answering that question called Why I Became an Atheist. And it's hard to summarize quickly, but I had studied under some of the best apologists and philosophers, and I learned about the arguments to the contrary. I knew them pretty well. I have earned 3 master's degrees in theology and philosophy of religion, and I did some PhD work at Marquette University, and I basically had the same kind of pedigree as the president of the Evangelical Philosophical Association, Paul Copan, except I didn't get a PhD, he did. So I knew the arguments pretty well, and when life kicks you in the head a little bit, you tend to reevaluate why you believe what you were taught to believe as a child. And I think everyone ought to reevaluate what they were taught to believe as a child. They just don't do it till life kicks them in the head a little bit. I'd like to see every child who goes to college do that, because you really cannot trust what your mama told you on her knees, even though that's almost blasphemy to say that. And the reason why we know that's not the case is because mamas have taught their kids all kinds of strange and different religious beliefs. And so you need to reevaluate those beliefs when you grow up, like a coming of age type of thing.
Now,
and so
how long ago was that?
You and Ed will do it, and so we'll just purposely trying to do that.
How long ago was that when you started looking inside of those ideas and questioning your own beliefs?
Well, that would have been 27 years ago. I went through several different stages. I'm old.
No,
Tomorrow's my birthday, you know, and I'm 63. Woohoo! I'm not making.
That's not old. You got ways to go.
I feel like it's old at all. So I slided away, if you will. I went from a fundamentalist when I first became a Christian as a 17-year-old. I didn't know any better. I just adopted the fundamentalist attitude, and then I became what I call an evangelical as I went to college, and then I adopted the term moderate. I don't know what that is, of course, anymore. It's all fundamentalist to me. And then I became more of a liberal-leaning Christian, and that didn't sit well with me. And so I became a deist, believing that God created everything and He's the basis of morals. And then when I die, I live on. And then before you know it, just the evidential weight of those beliefs, the evidence couldn't sustain any of that at all. And so I became an agnostic. All right, one thing I know, no religion is true. But the other thing that I don't know is that I don't know how we got here or why. So I was refusing to say I'm an atheist, just simply that there was no religious answer. And then I became more scientifically literate, and before you know it, I embraced metaphysical naturalism, atheism, and that's where I'm in today. So that process took roughly about 14 years, from 1990 to about 2004. Became an atheist then.
Oh, okay. So you were never part of the clergy project as one of the users for it?
No, I wasn't. No, I was before that. I did what I did on my own through reading and studying. I didn't do a lot of my research online. I had a library of books, which I've whittled down since then because I find some of those things no longer interesting or necessary. But yeah, I did it all on my own. I didn't really have anyone to talk to that I remember. One guy in particular. Now I think about two. But I didn't have anything online to discuss those ideas with. I just kind of thought my way through it.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but this book is a bit of a departure for you when compared to your previous books, and we're just going to ask you to speak to that. When did you get the idea for the book? Does it represent a change in your thinking relative to how to engage religious folk in the past?
Well, Nick, you already know the answer to that now, don't you? Because you've read it.
But this is for our audience. A lot of our audience has not read it, and so we think they would find this very interesting.
I just was having a little humor about it. First, let's talk about the previous books. I've published 10 books. If you count Why I Became an Atheist, first edition and second edition. And an atheist book to go into a second edition doesn't usually happen unless there's a significant demand for it. So 10 books in all, and I was quite respectful of religious belief because I was writing to convince believers. And to do that, you should be as respectful as possible. But as the years went by and as my publishing career went by, I became a little bit more jaded with every book, in some ways anyway, some more significant than others. And the unapologetic book is, I'm no longer really talking to believers. This is not a book for believers. If a believer gets it, they won't like it. I'm going to tell you that right now. And I didn't get any Christian recommendations of the book either, even though all of the other books that I've published did get at least one Christian philosopher or Christian theologian of some kind to recommend that book, which is unusual for an atheist book as well, because Christians don't really want to recommend the opposition. But if you look online, there's at least one Christian recommendation for every one of my books so far up until now.
Just so you know, John, I've given this book yesterday. In fact, a friend of mine, his name is Miguel, from Puerto Rico. He's a pastor wannabe. He's certainly a religious leader and a very online activist when it comes to Christianity, Pentecostal. I told him about your book. He read the cover and he downloaded it and he's listening to the audiobook mostly because you were a student of William Lane Craig, and that's his hero. And so, so Miguel is going to, I'm sure he's going to dissect your book. And I told him that if he wanted, I could have him communicate with you directly on his ideas and things. So anyway, just giving you a heads up on that.
Well, that's one thing, you can find my email address online. It's not exactly too obvious, but if somebody wants to find it or find me on Facebook, they can contact me, and I'm available for discussions. Usually, well, almost all the time, if someone wants to discuss something with me, I tell them to read a book or books, and then we can discuss it. And sometimes that cuts down on the people who actually want to have a discussion. It saves me time. You want to talk about a particular topic, and I'll say, well, I wrote a book on that, or I edited a book on that, and read that, and then let's talk. Now, that cuts down on about 60 to 70% of people who respond back, and I don't mean to do that, but I did answer them, and I don't need to reinvent the wheel. So if you'll do that, then we can talk about it, yeah.
So going back to Nick's question, you decided to kill an entire field.
Yeah, I said earlier we were talking.
Throw all these people into unemployment. And, when we're trying to create jobs, you're here destroying jobs. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, he's a disruptor.
Disruptor, that's the word.
Yeah, the Unapologetic is calling for the end to the philosophy of religion in the universities, secular universities, and is also targeting how we typically deal with religion ourselves as atheists. And people who are atheists who agree that faith has no method and that there's no basis for faith, there's no basis for religion, there's just nothing but the discussion of the existence and attributes of fairies. And people who think that of religion in general will be the ones who will most likely agree with my book and what needs to be done. And so I'm writing for a very small select people, but anyone else who wants to just listen in and to see, the state of, atheist thinking and what we're calling for, those of us who are in that boat, would benefit from reading it.
Now, this is not a new field, right? It's a field that has been around since the 1950s. So,
well, if you wouldn't mind just sort of explaining to our viewers what philosophy of religion is. I mean, I'm thinking back to my intro to philosophy. We weren't introduced to philosophy of religion. I'm trying to think what we did learn that it kind of fits under, like maybe metaphysics. So for people who aren't familiar with the term, just give them a short introduction.
Philosophy of religion is typically, now this is the typical traditional way it's viewed, is a subdiscipline underneath the general discipline of philosophy and under the general discipline of religion. So it's a hybrid of philosophy and proper and religion proper, and putting them together in its own subdivision called the philosophy of religion. And typically what you'll find in the philosophy of religion is a discussion of the attributes of God, a discussion of the meaning of God, the discussion of what a miracle is and how we could identify one. We'd find discussions of the existence of God down through the history, usually of the Western world, not the Eastern world. Usually they don't target that, they don't discuss that. But it's a rational and critical this dissection of religious constructs and definitions and the evidence for or against such a thing. And they take seriously those sorts of questions, much like somebody would try to show that the existence of Superman demands a certain kind of characteristics, like hovering in midair or being able to bounce bullets off his chest or flying faster than speeding a bullet or being able to move the globe without first discussing whether or not Superman exists.
Yes.
So that's what the philosophy of religion has reduced itself to.
I mean, it sounds like really it's a hijacking of philosophy.
Yeah, I would think so. Sure, I'm saying we don't need it. We don't need to discuss those kinds of questions because we don't have any evidence such a being exists or such angels exist or such miracles exist. First produce the evidence, then we can talk about what a miracle is, for instance, And I'm also calling attention to the fact that the philosophy of religion, as it's currently practiced, is done from a Western perspective. And what they
bias more like it.
Yeah, not an Eastern. And if you took all of the religions together and you treated them all the same, then what you would see is the evidence for that, faith being unreliable, faith being as Peter Boghossian said it. I think he says one thing we can know about faith is that at best it's false.
So a question about philosophy, though. I mean, again, thinking back to my university philosophy, there's a lot of philosophy that really doesn't use evidence, or maybe doesn't use evidence that you and I would recognize as evidence. Their evidence is, you know, such and such a passage from Plato, I mean, aren't there a lot of philosophers that literally do pure sort of a priori philosophy? I mean, I guess the term is Kant's, but you could think of Parmenides or Descartes even, sort of at least at the beginning of his philosophy. So the fact that POR doesn't use evidence is kind of almost like an industry standard, if not the industry standard.
Well, you know, the ontological argument for the existence of God, which I treat in one of my chapters, it tries to pull a rabbit out of the hat simply by the use of reasoning, and I deal with that in my book, and others have done so as well. So there are cases where just pure reasoning about those subjects may be important, and I'm not trying to dismiss that. That kind of stuff doesn't need a whole subdiscipline about it. You know, you don't need a whole subdiscipline to talk about the ontological argument. However, you can deal with that in a history of philosophy class for philosophy proper. And you can also look at what it means to have the ontological argument in the Eastern world, where you have to begin with the conception of God. What is your conception of the greatest conceivable being? Well, in the Eastern world, they can conceive of a greater being than the Western world does, and the Western world doesn't even acknowledge that when it comes to the ontological argument, because in the East, their greatest conceivable being is a being that cannot be conceived. It's just so obvious. They don't even know. I'm sorry, we can't deal with that, because that messes up our ontological argument entirely, because a greatest being that cannot be conceived cannot exist because, you know, according to the ontological argument. Because in order for it to exist, you have to first say that there's a greater than that. Well, you know, if anybody who is understanding the argument, then they know that. So, yeah, there's room for just pure philosophical thinking and reasoning, right?
Now, you did mention in there that in a survey that was done on regular philosophy and versus the philosophy of religion, who, you know, the deists, you know, in the regular philosophy, you have a lot less people that are pushing or believing in deities. And in the other is sort of the other side of the coin. It seems to me like philosophy one day said, hey, we get all these people in religion that is sort of affecting their way, and they want to talk about interesting things related to gods and things like that. Let's put them over there so they can kind of stay away from. So I wonder if it begs the question that could there be some papers and things done in the philosophy of religion, and if you were to try to publish those in regular philosophy, they'd be just like dismissed?
Oh, certainly. I'm certain of it. At least it should be. You'll be surprised to find some of the things that get published in bona fide philosophical journals. One of them is Alvin Plantinga's arguments about faith and reason and proper basicality of beliefs. It should never have been published in anything important at all. Those kind of ideas do find their way into those periodicals only because they're novel and new and interesting. But I'm arguing that there's a difference between something that's interesting and something that's important. And I think that far too often philosophers of religion like to play a game of chess, an intellectual game of chess with ideas simply because it's fun and neat, and to try to one-upmanship the other person and show where they're wrong and who knows what. But what we have to do is have to distinguish between that which is important to discuss, you know, and not simply this is interesting. And I'm calling on atheist philosophers of religion in the universities to stick to what's important and not just this is interesting, because if you find that Alvin Plantinga's arguments on those lines are interesting and you deal with them in a class, then you're giving them a certain degree of credibility by virtue of the fact that you discuss them in a class. And I'm just saying you should not do that. You should not do that.
Good point. I hadn't really gotten the difference between interesting and important before. It's sort of, because I was sort of confused. Like, I definitely felt like you had derived some pleasure from your engagement with this literature, and yet you're telling readers not to go there. And it sort of reminded me of a liberal radio host I used to listen to, who said she watched Fox News so you don't have to. Do you sort of see yourself as being in the same position, as being sort of a middleman, really, between your free-thinking readership and this philosophy of religion?
Good question. I appreciate that. Well, in a way, maybe. In a way, yes. But there's more to that. I argue that the way you deal with those concepts should be done differently. You should put all concepts, all faith-based concepts on the table and not privilege any one of them. Like, for instance, if you're talking about the afterlife, you're discussing, like philosophers of religion will do, the proper concept of hell, or that is the one that is most congenial to the demands of, say, the Bible and our sense of morality and dignity of the human being. Well, if you do that, then you need to talk about all concepts of the afterlife and not just single out, the Christian concept of hell or the conservative Christian concept of hell, because to single the conservative concept of hell out for discussion raises it up, gives it a certain kind of merit that it shouldn't have. Because once you start talking about all the other concepts in the afterlife that people have held and are holding now, then you see quite plainly how ridiculous those concepts all are as a total entity, of ideas. So it's not that you don't deal with a particular instance of the afterlife, like, say, a conservative doctrine of hell. So you still can talk about. You still should talk about that. I'm just saying let's not have a whole subdivision on that, you see. And I'm saying that when you do talk about the afterlife, you're better off dealing with it in a comparative religion class or discipline, or an anthropology of religion class. You don't need the sub-discipline of the philosophy of religion to do that. They ought to be all dealt with in a comparative religion class. Let's do away with that and have more comparative religion classes and anthropology of religion classes.
So what I understand so far is if you remove philosophy of religion, it would be like and I think you used the same words. It's like removing intelligent design from being taught as a science, and also similar to Hector Avalos talking about ending biblical studies, because apparently 2,000 years of biblical studies is plenty.
It is. Yeah. Hector's my hero. He blogs with me at Debunking Christianity, and we've met, and he's a good friend. He's written several books calling for the end, the relevance of the Bible for the modern world. He says the Bible has caused a lot of trouble. It's elevated a Jesus that never existed, as they want to discuss. For instance, his most recent book is The Bad Jesus, I think is the name of it, and he says that Jesus really wasn't all that good of a person. That blows biblical scholarship out, So, but he's called for the end of biblical studies in the universities. That is, professors ought to teach the truth. Now, here's the point. Here's my point, and Hector says it better than I do. It's time for professors in those disciplines of biblical studies and the philosophy of religion, if the discipline is to continue and not be done away with immediately, then to tell their students the truth. And Hector Avalos does that, and that is by telling them the Bible has no relevance for the modern world. And the philosophers of religion who are teaching in their classes should teach their students that religion has no merit. Religion has no evidence for it, deal with some specific instances of that. Basically, is to put themselves out of a job by teaching the truth, even though their students are believers and they may not like it.
Yeah. So we want to get back to your proposal for religious philosophy of religion, but before we do that, I just wanted to ask, where does your argument situate itself with respect to that larger argument that people are having about philosophy in general? I'm sure there are a lot of people who've sort of been a part of that. The only one that comes to mind right now is Stephen Hawking in The Grand Design. He said philosophy is dead. So is your issue with a particular subfield of philosophy, or do you align yourself more with that larger sort of animus against philosophy represented by Hawking and presumably other people?
I'm sympathetic to Hawking and others, but I'm not actually dealing with that. I think there might just simply be the call for rational discussion of all sorts of subjects, and philosophy is apparently that discipline. It's to talk about those issues that science hasn't quite yet settled, I suppose, because once science settles an issue, then you don't really need much discussion, except the implications of the evidence for modern life. So there's always going to be some merit to that. So I'm not calling for the same kind of end to philosophy proper as I am for the philosophy of religion.
So that's just the start. That's how you get to eliminate the whole thing. No, I'm just kidding. But you do. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think that so long as philosophy is done properly, and again, you cannot limit yourself to Western philosophy. Just if we're talking about that as a discipline, you've got to talk about philosophy, world philosophy, African philosophy, not just European American, but South American philosophy, Chinese and Japanese philosophy. You got to have a global perspective, and I think that that's got some merit. But talk about things that have no evidence for them is a different story, and I think that's what the philosophy of religion is focused on, especially by conservative Christians. It's dominated by conservative Christians, and that's got to end, because they're using that to lend credibility to their faith simply by virtue of the fact that exists, and they have a professor. Oh, who are you? I'm a professor of philosophy of religion, where you teach Western Michigan University. Oh, really? And so you must be somebody important. You must be sophisticated. You must have some really good answers, and it's meritable to have that kind of a discipline, and you to have that kind of a tenured position. And yet, it's nothing more than the discussion of fairies and their attributes and what powers they have, when you haven't yet proved that fairies exist, and we know they don't.
Now, just to make sure that our viewers know, you don't always agree with all the atheists just automatically, or automagically, as I call it sometimes. You disagree with Keith Parson, who believes that that sophisticated philosophical questions should only be done by sophisticated theologians and atheists, and sort of let the experts take care of this, and don't step too much into it. What's your
right? Not at all. No, I mean, he reminds me of someone who is arguing that the philosophers should be kings. I mean, we have to step aside and let wait on him to have the answers. When science has the answers, we don't need him, or when there isn't any evidence to discuss about the existence of a God or miracles. Anyway, we first produce the evidence. So not at all. I mean, he's a great guy as far as I know. I haven't met him. But I think he likes the fact that when Christians are writing a book or editing an anthology, they call upon him to write that chapter, because he deals with conservative ideas in those books, as if those are the ideas that have the most merit. And it's really nice to have him in a book like that. One's called Christian Theism that I have. It's a really good book, actually. But he's dealing with the conservative view of hell, and that's who's editing the book, and that's the authors who are in that book. And so, look, here's we don't agree with him, but look, he's treating our view of hell as if it has special merit, and that's really damaging, I think. I think it's not so good for atheists. I just don't think it's good for atheists. You got to talk about all concepts of afterlife and put the hell as in one of them, and talk about the history of hell and how it began, and not only just the barbarism that's involved.
So one of the things you talk about is credentialism. In other words, the idea that people without a degree in a field can't participate in a discussion with people inside of it or on the subject at all. And I guess a pretty common complaint is, well, you can't criticize religion because you don't have a PhD in theology. It occurred to me, though, that it's quite all right from those same people's perspective for believers not to have degrees in theology. So how is it that they're not requiring the average believer in the pew to read Alvin Plantinga, but the minute you criticize religion, suddenly you need to have that sheepskin?
You need to be an expert in order to talk about it.
I don't like double standards. You just pointed one out. That's a good one. I find that they do that. And I don't, I don't require that. If someone wants to criticize me, they can not have the credentials. But I do find that someone who isn't so credentialed doesn't really have as good of an argument, against me as those who are.
So you've never been prevented from a debate or anything. I know, for instance, that Matt Dillahunty, a good friend of mine, he fairly often, William Lane Craig has refused to debate him on a few occasions because he says, well, you don't have a college degree, you don't have a master's in divinity or anything like that. And, if I debate you with my doctorates, then all I'm doing is bringing you up and you're going to be bringing me down in the caliber. Personally, I think he's just afraid. But what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think that people can have their own criteria for who they want to debate. It's just that William Lane Craig has a hypocritical set of criteria. I mean, he'll debate Christopher Hitchens, and he debated Eddie Tabash, who don't have PhDs or, as far as I know, master's degrees in the subject. But apparently, Matt Dillahunty is somebody different. And I don't have a PhD, but I have several master's degrees and PhD studies, but apparently I'm different. He won't debate me either. And Jeff Lauder is another one. He won't debate him. I call on William Lane Craig to debate us all. Here's some influential people, and he should be debating us. But he'd rather debate, somebody who's maybe, and if the criteria is fame, that is, since Christopher Hitchens has had fame, notoriety, then he should debate Matt for that reason too.
Yeah, it seems to me that
I don't know if he's scared or not. I think that he doesn't want to debate us because it tells his audience, his fan club, if you will, that we exist. And if he can sweep us underneath the rug and not mention us, or not mention us too often anyway, then his fan club don't have to read our books or have to follow us on the video, channels that we have. And so I think he just wants to sweep us under the rug. I don't think he's afraid of us. He's smart enough. He's been debating since high school debate teams that he was on. And it's just, I think he wants to hide us under the rug. He doesn't want to acknowledge our existence as little as possible anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say that it seems that that's always the calculation from both sides when asked to participate in a debate is, am I giving the other side too much publicity in the process? And yeah, so obviously Hitchens is better known than he is, so he's going to go there. He's not going to, give undue publicity to somebody that doesn't already, I suppose, have it. Or...
Exactly. Well, not only that, if he debates you, for instance, John, it'll be admitting that you are now at his level. And now you're in the opposite side, and yeah, you're right. That's marketing-wise, that would be crazy. It may plant doubts because now he's giving you the importance that you don't deserve. So yeah,
it is. Yeah, but I don't mind it because because it's out there that he won't debate me. It's just out there, and people are wondering why. So he's going to have to live with that and try to answer it. And every answer he has come up with so far, it doesn't make sense. So yeah, he's just going to have to keep darkening that question. Well, why won't you debate Loftus?
So John, there's one thing that we have to discuss before we go any further. We got about 8 minutes left in the show, and one thing that, so you came in my radar some years ago with a little thing called the Outsider's Test for Faith. And I first saw it and read it. I thought it was very interesting. And then I noticed you developed it more. And no one really has come out to say this is bunk. Could you just highlight a little bit what that is?
Well, the Outsider's Test for Faith is to treat your own religious faith just as if you had never heard of it before, as an outsider. Intellectually act like this is the first time I've heard this, and you're going to do a couple of things. You're going to make your previously held faith pass the burden of proof test. That is, it all of a sudden now, just by the very intellectual act of treating it as an outsider, or at least attempting to do so, you're going to look for evidence as the burden of proof requires. Just as you would if you heard that Muhammad flew into the sky on a winged horse. You're going to ask for some evidence for that. Well, now you're going to do the same thing for a virgin birth, see? Now you're going to do the same thing for a sun that stood still, or, you know, a fish that swallowed a man, and or 3 men who levitated on, I think it was Mount Olives or something like that, and someone who rose from the dead. You're going to ask for that kind of evidence, and then, so you're going to look at testimonial evidence, and you realize, well, it's not really testimonial at all, because the definition of eyewitness testimony is this: someone who saw what happened and could testify under cross-examination. You never see that. That is not an eyewitness testimony to say, to read a document that says 2 or 3 or 4 people or 12 people or even 500 people saw Jesus alive again. That's not testimonial evidence, because there's no cross-examination. We don't know if these people actually saw what's being claimed of them, so it's only one testimony, not 2 or 3 or 4 or 12 or 500 people. It's one document. You only have one item that testifies of that sort of thing, and you ask yourself, wait a minute, is that good enough to accept? Is that worthy enough? And so as an outsider, what you're going to do, all the way down through all the claims that you find in the Bible or the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita, whatever you are religious of, you're going to treat it as if it has the burden of proof, and you're going to ask for evidence for it. And you're going to treat it exactly like you treat the other religions that you don't accept. And you don't accept them because they lack evidence. And it's a fairly simple idea. I think anyone who's ever rejected a religion has probably used the outsider test because they were raised to believe in something somewhere down the line. And so then all of a sudden something happens, or they're smarter than the average bear, and they start asking the right kinds of questions, and before you know it, they find out that they were duped by their mama on their mama's knee, and so they reject it. And
well, I got to tell you, I saw something being done one time that in a way is a little bit of what you just said, but applying it. And it was this person who would walk in, people in the street. Now, banking on the fact the majority of people don't know enough about their holy book and what it stands about, what they would do is they would read a quote from a holy book, usually something supernatural or horrific or something like that, and say, number one, do you believe that this is true or could ever be true? Number two, is this from something, a book that you would follow or not follow? And really, it was just pure random, because they all tend to have nasty things. They tend to have incredible things. And people are taking guesses and realizing that, their book is just that. So in a way, it was a way of doing the same thing, but making it so that people can't have that bias. Because, the problem with religion is you get that in your brain, and you have that bias that keeps blocking you. Even though you may think you're treating the religion the same as an outside religion, in fact, you're giving it more of a leadway.
Yeah, like they might quote a passage that says, happy is he who dashes the babies on the rocks. And they'll say, oh, that's terrible. I can't believe anybody would be happy for dashing babies against the rocks. Well, it's right here in your Bible.
So the outsider's test for faith, it kind of reminds me of John Rawls. He speaks of a veil of ignorance that you should be, when you're using to analyze any society from the point of view of somebody either outside the society or somebody who'd be an outsider in the society, then would it be fair?
I mentioned that in my book. Yes, I think so. Exactly.
So one thing that we want to get to before the show's over is just some ask you to clarify your proposal for philosophy of religion. Sometimes I get the feeling when you talk about the end of philosophy of religion, like you're a true abolitionist. Other times I got the impression that you might accept some kind of a reformation, if I could use such a religious word, a reformation of the philosophy of religion.
Yeah, if you reformed the philosophy of religion, then it wouldn't be the philosophy of religion anymore. So, and there are a lot of professors in that discipline who are doing what I'm asking. It's just that the discipline still exists, and no one's about to dismantle it just yet based on my little book. So as long as they're in that department, I'm not asking them to resign or anything at all. I'm just saying to treat the subjects like, I suggested, when it comes to, like, for instance, Doctrine of Hell, talk about all ideas about the afterlife. I'm just saying treat it correctly. In fact, I say this. Teach the philosophy of religion exactly the way you write your books. See, I find a lot of these philosophers of religion, they'll write their book, atheist philosophers, they'll write their books, and then they'll teach the subject differently. They'll teach the subject like Oprah Winfrey would be teaching it. Like
popularity. From a popularity point of view, they want good ratings for, because a lot of students rate professors, and so they want a professor that is fair, that is allowing them to think that faith is a good thing and that kind of stuff.
Right. And I'm saying that should end, right.
But we got only about 2 minutes, and I wanted to ask you in reference to the future of religion. Robert Ingersoll in the 1860s said, with science and with all these things, all this knowledge that we have and better communications and all of that, in 100 years, religion will no longer exist because, it'll be out in the open and science would show how silly it is. Well, was he wrong or what? So I see a lot of people that predict the demise of religion and that kind of stuff. I got a little bit of a hint of that in your book. What's your take on that?
Well, yeah, I think religion's here to stay. I think that I don't know why. I can't explain why. Maybe there's some kind of a genetic basis for it. I think so. Located in cognitive biases or something. It's here to stay. In fact, polls show that by the year 2050, that these religions are going to be thriving, because of birth rates, if nothing else. It's just that it is eventually going to die. It's just I don't know how soon. And what we want to do, if nothing else, is remove religion from the public sphere, get it out of politics, get it out today. And the sooner we can get it out, the better off the world will be. And hopefully that can happen, and let the cultured Christians and believers around the world just stew in their pants, in their enclaves, and that's what I hope. I don't know how soon, but I can still call for the end of things, even if it looks like there's no sign of their ending.
So David's given me the last question, which is, what sort of feedback, if any, have you gotten from the discipline philosophy of religion since the book has been out?
And you got 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, first off, I think it hit some of them in a blindsided way, and they don't know what to say. They don't know when to say or how to say it. Second thing, I had an article in the latest Free Inquiry magazine of 5 pages. I don't know if you can see this or not. And that's going to provoke more discussion, certainly in Free Inquiry. So, but they don't like it.
Well, it's telling people, your meal is going to go away if you actually do the right thing. It's tough to swallow by a lot of people, I guess.
I remember that about academia. If they really didn't like something, the worst thing they could do is not write about it.
Exactly.
Maybe it's also like giving somebody publicity.
All right. Well, John, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here. It's been a pleasure. We look forward to more of your commentaries and stuff. I look forward to seeing you in the DC area next time you're around. So hopefully you'll come and see us. And
okay.
Thank you so much for talking to us.
And thank you, Nick.
Thanks for having me, David.
Let's hope we see you here again.